I would like to encourage people who have joined us to the session today to add comments, questions, ideas to the chat so that we can maybe get back to you around these things at a later point. So please do add some comments here. We're really, really keen that we get some feedback and think about kind of things that people are particularly interested in. We may just have a few minutes just for some quick questions. So if anyone wants to kind of add anything to the chat that we can put to the panel, that would be great. And if the panel could come back on the screen. I know that Sylvia's got to leave right away, so thank you, Sylvia, for your contribution. I know that I had a question that I had in mind, which was around the fact that there's been quite a lot of important discussions in this meeting around concepts around trust, issues around cultural changes needed in terms of actually kind of forwarding and advancing sort of the steps that we're taking around the evolving nature of using different types of data and how we involve patients and the public in that. And there's been quite a few important reports recently, including the Goldacre Review, which again talks very clearly about the role of trust and engaging public in sort of those next steps in terms of using data effectively. And I just wondered from the panel what their thoughts are around how these reports may help shape the next steps in moving forward in involving patients and the public. Has anyone got any thoughts around how these reports then maybe shape things moving forward?
I'm happy to go. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting report, and maybe we could share the link with everyone if people haven't seen it. But the report kind of highlights key messages, and it's really important for organisations to think about how we put those into practice and how we might make changes within our organisations and to do that. But I also think in terms of like reports and things like that, it's about accessibility and making sure that we're kind of reaching out to different audiences. And they're perhaps not something that the public will be reading. And I think the message really needs to get through to the public about the trust and transparency as well, of how people can get involved and how important it is to be involved, as well as organizations and institutes. So we really need to start thinking more about perhaps how we can do that and how we can make the messages more accessible perhaps to the public. Although they're on public platforms and things like that, are public members actually seeing these messages, and how are they kind of making a difference, I think is essential. Don't know if anybody else has anything to add to that.
I mean, I would agree with all of that. Yeah, definitely we need much more accessibility, transparency to the public about what's happening, what the opportunities are. I think that these reports, the Goldacre Review, it really highlights the importance of both technical and social approaches to establishing trustworthiness, establishing a social license. And I think that the commitments are made again to the importance of patient public involvement and engagement. And I guess the really important thing here is to harness those commitments and to make sure that they are turned into actionable, meaningful, impactful activities. And I think to do that, that's where we need to really build evidence base around the value of engagement and to demonstrate the impact, the value, the real tangible contributions that this can make to improve best practice and establish trustworthy, ethical approaches to using data. So yeah, there's a big opportunity to really capitalize on that and create real meaningful impact from this.
I think there's a question here that's from Aidan Smith that and the question is, do the panel have any advice or comments on incorporating PPI into research where it's more methodological and the direct impact or the direct patient level impact is less clear?
Yeah, so this is actually an area that I've been really, really interested in about PPI and methodological research, because there's no obvious ways of involvement. But I think the principles for data intense research and more methodological research are very, very similar. So it's just thinking about which areas would benefit from PPIE. And I always say, with public involvement in methodological or data intense research, a light touch approach is better than a tokenistic approach. So even if it's kind of light touch and you're doing PPIE at those engagement stages of the project to see if it's, you know, if the public affirm the importance of the research, for example, do they agree with what you're doing and the research questions that you're doing? Do they even understand the research and what you're actually trying to do? So again, it's kind of the same principles as data intense research, where you're kind of building that sort of relationship and also building that knowledge to understand what's actually happening with the research. And also, I think there's some examples that we can send around to you as well of PPIE and methodological research. But yeah, I think more light touch perhaps is better than nothing at all, but also thinking about the early stages and engagement in PPIE as well. So towards the end, the dissemination stages as well is crucial.
Any other comments for anyone else? I know there's quite a few questions and comments coming through on the chat there. Jenny, I don't know whether you want to add anything, or whether there's something in the chat that you'd like to pick up on.
Oh, I mean, the thing I'd most like to add is what a very stimulating session it's been. I've really enjoyed it. I think probably what we should do, there are a lot of very important questions in the chat, some of them about funding. I spent a lot of years on funding committees, so I know the problem. I think it's partly, you've got to have this kind of conversation to make the argument to justify the funding. So it sounds a bit back to front, but if I go back right to what I said right at the very beginning, say you were trying to get funding for a clinical trial, there's good practice that you can refer to in PPIE. So if you say, this is what I'm going to do, then the funder knows what you mean, and provided it's justified and contextual and everything, then, and also the idea of keeping it up to date, and it's not a one-off, it's got to be fed through the project. Again, if you make that case in something they're familiar with, they're likely to buy it. Our challenge here is to, it's the kind of thing that some of the other speakers were talking about, turning the very best of intentions into practicalities. And in order to achieve what we've set out, we'd have to do X, Y, and Z, and that would cost this, 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 and this. And like everything else, they'd decide if that was too expensive, you know, value for money. But it's very much about finding the equivalent for this sort of project of what a funder would expect to see in an application for a clinical trial. And that's, I won't say off the peg, because you've got to make the case, but people know a reviewer or a commissioner would know what they wanted to see, and they would expect to pay for quality. I do see, somebody mentioned RFPB in the chat. That's I think RFPB has multiple challenges across funding. The involvement and engagement side is kind of part of that. So again, the only way to do it is to piggyback on other projects and capitalise. It's not, I wish I had an answer to the funding thing, but it's mainly about being very clear about what the money would pay for, and that being part of this coherent story along the lines of what we've heard today. This is how you get the best evidence. So that's my, if you like, academic feedback. In terms of continuing the conversation and replying to questions that people might ask, given that sadly we are out of time, then we'll certainly be thinking about best ways of continuing the conversation. And Abby, who's our organiser, will be contacting anybody who was registered for today, just a standard follow-on. So if you are happy or indeed keen to continue the conversation, that's the route through which we'd be very, very pleased if you did it. So no, thank you very much, everybody. It's been a very, very interesting hour. So thanks a lot. Back to you, Kate.
Thank you very much. There's been some really interesting comments in the chat, which I think sort of divide a little bit into the good quality, meaningful PPI within projects, and also then at the more national, international level in terms of raising the profile of some of these important discussions we've been having. And I think it would be great if we can take some of those things forward. So thanks again, everyone, for being a part. So thank you to all our speakers. We know we rammed a lot into this session, so thank you everyone for agreeing to take part. We covered a lot of different areas. Thank you to everyone who registered, and to Abby for helping to organise everything. As Jenny said, please get in touch if there's any further comments you'd like to make, or how you'd like to get involved with the incubator. So if you contact Abby's email, then you'll have that in your where you registered for this session today. So thanks again, and hope you have a good day.
Bye all. Bye bye.